run the NDP these days, and that is a small clique of consultants who circle through the provincial and federal party. I think the reason that they were so eager to get into this, pact with the Liberal Party and stick with it for 3 years was because I don't see them having a clear, distinct political project that they believe in. I mean, not to get personal, but like someone like Jennifer Howard, who is effectively the head of the party, is someone whose political idols are people like Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, a circle of kind of corporate Democrats who I think, are very far and away from the roots, the more radical democratic socialist roots of the party, grounded in movement organizing and political education and real struggle. And so I think if you don't have a distinct political project that is grounded in a vision for a different kind of Canada based on solidarity and redistribution, and then I think it compels you to resolve that problem by getting a seat at the table. And I think that, the reason that this has happened is, a multi-decade shift in the party that I think dates back to the 80s and 90s, really, when, neoliberalism was ascendant. It was starting to lose its industrial base of support in the unions. Ideologically, there was this, utter embrace of capitalism. And I think the party had a choice at that point, which was to really reset how it would operate, connect with social movements, or do what it ended up doing, which was to kind of sand off the more radical parts of its, political legacy, the support for nationalization and redistribution and, full-on support for workers' rights, and become a party that was more moderate and more like the Liberals, to be honest. And I think that's the path it chose. And what that led to was, a greater emphasis on the personality and cult of the leader, which we saw, I think, full bore with Jack Layton. We saw a far greater emphasis on the air war and on focus groups and on spending huge amounts of advertising rather than doing, day-to-day grassroots education, mobilizing, organizing. And what we saw is a lot of the local riding associations started to atrophy. And what you have today, and I think these tendencies of this kind of professionalization of the party, the centralization of control, the wariness and rejection of the power and sometimes messiness of social movements, is a party that is disconnected from its own grassroots, disconnected from the social movements in this country, whether Indigenous rights, environment, anti-racism, even workers, that could provide the fuel and engine for a broader movement, of which the NDP would be its parliamentary expression.
Can I ask, though, when it comes to the supply and confidence agreement that lasted for most of the last part of Trudeau's reign, couldn't you make the argument? You brought up how many times the Liberals and Conservatives collaborated, often to defeat progressive ideas put forward by the NDP. Can you not argue that that confidence agreement was the only way we were going to get pharmacare, the only way that we were going to get dental care and anti-scab legislation? Can they be criticized for entering into an agreement when presenting the legislation in Parliament all those years with, big conservative and liberal majorities combined, was not getting it done? How are they to be criticized then for taking the opportunity to pass legislation when they had it?
I think that's a good point. I think if you are thinking from the perspective of a strategist in today's NDP, right, which doesn't have the ambition to build a movement inspired by bold ideas, right? If it is happy with getting concessions for programs that I admit are incredibly valuable to many people in this country, then you're right that that is the best way to extract those things. And they got, um, childcare, pharmacare, the beginnings of pharmacare, and means tested dental. But I guess the argument I'm making is that, and I think history bears this point out, um, if the NDP were more politically ambitious, if it were invested in, um, advocating year round for bold ideas, open to democratizing the party so that huge amounts of energy could flow into it, and it could really serve as an amplification machine for the visionary and entirely popular demands of social movements around this country, I think it would change the fundamental equation. And I think in moments in Canadian history where the Liberal government has been terrified of the growing popularity of the NDP or its precursor, the CCF, that's when it gives the biggest concessions of all, um, like Medicare, like more fundamental workers' rights. And so I think that, like, yes, the NDP can use what leverages it has because it holds the balance of power. But I think there's a far greater and more powerful leverage to be found, which I don't think they've tried to do. But I think if they did, uh, things would look very different.
Okay, I think that's a very good insight.